Hi there, I'm Pastor Clark from St. Paul Lutheran Church in Clinton, Iowa, and we get to be together again for Bible study this coming Sunday. We will continue on from the passage we heard just before, the feeding of the 5,000. So it went the feast at the palace, Herod's feast, in which he served on a platter, on a serving plate, John the Baptist's head, then to the wilderness where Jesus went into hiding with his disciples, and then the crowds found him, and he healed them and fed them. In great contrast to what Herod did, what Herod's feast was like, and then this picks up immediately after that. So why don't we just get to it? So immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while Jesus dismissed the crowds. So immediately, that's interesting. Jesus doesn't even wait basically until the meal is over. They've just collected the baskets of leftovers, but everybody's still sitting around the table, maybe lingering. If you've ever been kind of at a dinner like that, and sends the disciples away right away. And Jesus then dismisses the crowds alone. Wonder what's going on there. Maybe Jesus is a little mad. I don't know. Maybe Jesus wants to give them some time to think about what's just happened. He challenged them earlier. You give them something to eat. There's a way in which they were not relying on God. They were more focused on, I guess, the problem, the challenge of feeding all these people, and casting about for someone else, something else to feed them. Maybe Jesus wants them to go really kind of process what they experienced without him. That little freedom. Sometimes you need to get away from your teachers to really do the learning you need to do. All right, but let's also notice just something real quick. They get into a boat. There's a lake here, and we were just kind of in Matthew, this kind of new Moses image that Jesus is presented as, and the new Pharaoh that Herod and Pilate and basically the whole Roman imperial system are. And so this is an Exodus kind of a story. It's a new Exodus here, this feeding of the 5,000 in this deserted place. And if you remember that Exodus story, there's a sea, and there's a crossing. So keep that in the back of your mind as they get in this boat. All right, so after Jesus had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. Mountains are key in Matthew. I mean, throughout biblical literature, they're a place of connection and communion with God. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is a key in Matthew. It's his revelation. This, like Moses on the mountaintop with God's commandments. Here are Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, his teachings, to parallel Moses again. Then at the end of Matthew, when Jesus is raised from the dead, he meets his disciples on a mountain. He ascends, leaves them on a mountain. So it's kind of like here's these mountaintops that are, maybe a little bit catching that sort of mountaintop experience that we sometimes talk about, but at least it's a setting that invites us to pay attention, that what's happening here and around here are important. Jesus goes by himself to pray. And when evening came, Jesus was there alone. So here, Matthew's kind of repeating this. He's by himself and alone. Um, this is Jesus is uh, doing the kind of prayer that he has invited his disciples to do. Back in the Sermon on the Mount, we hear this on Ash Wednesday. The hypocrites love to stand in the synagogues and on the street corners and pray their long prayers. But when you pray, go into your room, your secret place, and shut the door. And your Father who sees in secret, hears in secret, will reward you. So Jesus is doing that. Jesus is praying in that kind of way. There's silence, solitude, stillness. That's the prayer. That's the context of the prayer that Jesus prays. The context for relating to God. A few months ago, we were kind of playing with that. I guess it was through the fall of 2019. We at St. Paul were reading the Universal Christ and kind of talking a little bit about contemplative prayer and the importance of silence, solitude, stillness. So maybe that's the simple reason why Jesus sent the disciples away. I don't know why he couldn't have waited until after dismissing the crowd, but there you have it. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land because the wind was against them. So a couple of things here. One is, this is the narrator speaking, the narrator of Matthew, but kind of makes me wonder if Jesus is praying for his disciples, or if he noticing this. Can he see this from the mountain, and is he aware of what's going on for them? Maybe so, and maybe they are part of his prayer. Another thing is this word battered by the waves. This word has some connotations of abuse of power. If we would talk about this is maybe old language that we've evolved from, but a battered woman, a way of talking about domestic violence, and certainly an abuse of the power that comes in intimate relationships, of violation. The word battered, maybe the word brutality today would kind of capture this. We talk about police brutality. That's there's ongoing protests and organizing around ending police brutality, and so that word, the waves. The waves are enacting that same brutality. Matthew is intentionally we already talked about it before, a very clear political dimension and a clear political critique, or an awareness, an honesty about how political leaders create sickness and hunger and brutality. That's what these passages are all about. I mean, if you don't like that reading, it's just there in the words Matthew uses, both in the Greek, and it's kind of also plain in the English, just how these stories are set side by side, Herod versus Jesus, and these very clear allusions to the Exodus story, this new Moses, this liberation. That was a political liberation as well as a kind of spiritual liberation. Okay, so the boat was battered by the waves. It was far from land. The wind was against them. Here is kind of a metaphor for the difficult difficult lives. Not just disciples of Jesus had to lead, I think, but all people, and the kind of people who had come to Jesus in the wilderness, not the elites, not the wealthy people, not the people who are in control of the temple and the palace and the empire, but the regular people. Okay, the wind was against them. Early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the lake. On the lake. Okay, so this is a miraculous thing, just sort of, he's just walking towards them on the lake. There's think about this prayer in relationship to the miracle here, or this kind of supremacy over the lake, and over the danger and over the storm. This prayer is a powerful thing. It is from this deep communion with God in solitude, stillness, and silence that Jesus can exercise the authority, the dominion, the power that he exercises right here. There's like there's another a kind of like I don't know, critique or political dimension here, because emperors of Rome kind of claimed to be rulers of here's a quotation, of the land, the sea, and nations, right? Lands, seas, and nations. This is the kind of propaganda, or the hubris, you might say, of the rulers of Rome, the empire. Here's a clear demonstration of like, oh no, it's Jesus. Jesus is the one, the ruler, such that he can walk right over, right on top of, is not subject to the churn and chaos that is this lake. Okay, so, but when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. This is a common scene in the Bible of an encounter with God, and the human response is fear, terror. They cried out in fear. I mean, I'm reminded of the shepherds in Luke, who see the angels, the heavenly host. And perhaps also this terror and fear is there's a way in which Jesus's approach holds up a mirror and reveals to us, and maybe to them, what's present for them in their daily lives, terror and fear. And here's just more of the same. But immediately again, Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Okay, so take heart, take courage, be brave. And this "it is I," really Jesus says, "I am." Take heart, I am. Do not be afraid. The whole Exodus story gets rolling when Moses encounters God in the burning bush, and God names God's self as "I am." So here, those words "I am" are in Jesus's mouth again, so that's the heart of this kind of this "be courageous" sandwich that's here. I mean, these kind of sandwiches are all over, and often on bigger scales in the Gospels. But you kind of have a repetition of essentially the same message: take heart and do not be afraid. And then the thing that's in the center is the most important thing. That's the "I am." So they call it a chiastic pattern. It sort of like parentheses, multiple parentheses surrounding the thing in the middle, a sandwich, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's a taco, but the like, take heart, I am, do not be afraid. The source of that throwing off fear, the source of that courage is Jesus, is Jesus's presence, and Jesus's proximity to us. It is even more than that, the fact that Jesus is the God of Exodus, right? I am. Jesus makes that like 100% identification of himself with the God of creation who liberated Israel from slavery in Egypt. Okay, so that's what's at the heart of it. That's where our courage comes from. Maybe another encouragement to pray in the way that Jesus was praying. So Peter answers Jesus, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. This is this wonderful combination of submission in the use of the word Lord. So Peter is kind of submitting to Jesus here, and a daring. Boy, what a daring thing to ask. Command me to come to you on the water. Certainly an expression of faith. And maybe we can say it is it says something about what Peter has learned about the character of Jesus, is that Jesus keeps inviting his disciples to do what he did. What Jesus, or what Peter has learned so far as a student of Jesus, is that that Jesus is giving them everything, teaching them how to do everything. So, command me to come out on the water, just as you are out on the water. I'm just sort of speechless in that. Like there's something really profound there about anything that Jesus does, the faithful can do too, because of how generous Jesus is with his power, with his ability. Like, we're capable of it too. And Jesus, that's what Peter's learned apparently from about up to this point. All right, so then Jesus says, come. I mean, one word, there it is. I don't know about you, maybe you've had experiences like that, of like, that's all the calling is. That the calling from God is a simple yes, is a simple come, is a simple go, do it. The idea comes from us originally, and there's just a God's yes. Our own spirits will speak a question of, is this what you want me to do? And all we get is a yeah, go for it. That's kind of how I hear this. I mean, I have my own experiences in life of that. It just rings true for me. So Peter got out of the boat. Holy cow. Started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. I mean, it's happening. It's miraculous. It's amazing. I mean, Peter here is standing in for the rest of the disciples. I mean, there's a way in which Peter functions as he's not just a leader of the disciples in just that kind of straightforward and literal way you might read not just this story but others, but that in Peter we get a window into all of the disciples, or we get to see he embodies the whole. Peter does. So even more, a reason not to see there's something special about him that's different from us, but an affirmation that this can be you. This sometimes is us. So he's walking on the water. And again, so this links back to, the Exodus journey that crossed the Red Sea. In that story, the sea was parted and they walked on dry land. But here is a kind of an even more than that story. They don't even need the seas to be parted because Jesus walks right on it, and Peter does too, walks right on the water. But when Peter noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. That fear comes back again. And beginning to sink, Peter cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now, you of little faith, Jesus uses this a couple of times. It's almost a term of endearment, but it's also just an honest assessment that Peter had faith enough to want to come out of the boat, had faith enough to do it, faith enough to take at least a few steps on the water, but not faith enough to go all the way. So there's faith, but a little of it. Yeah. These immediatelys, 3 times in these 11 verses, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat, and immediately Jesus spoke to them, and Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught Peter. This speaks to Jesus's responsiveness, right? First, in both of these last 2 cases, Jesus is responding to the disciples' fear, and immediately acts to calm that fear, to save them, as the case may be. And so maybe we can read backwards these last 2 immediatelys into that first immediately and think, well, maybe was there something saving? Was Jesus responding to their lack of understanding in this immediately and sending them away? I don't know, maybe, but immediately Jesus acts. It's how responsive Jesus is to the crisis that the people around him are in, his disciples specifically here, saving them, giving them courage, inviting them to faith. So maybe that first immediately is in that same vein. So I want to go back and talk about this little thing about Peter, but let's just wrap everything up here. When they got into the boat, Jesus and Peter got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." The answer to the question of who is this, that came earlier in Matthew. Those in the boat worshipped him. That connects to the last mountaintop in Matthew 2, where they worship and they doubt. So that kind of duality, or that both and, it's not a duality. It's all of the above kind of thing happens then as now. But let's talk about Peter's little experience here, and I think this resonates a lot with me. I'm going to be quoting from a book called Matthew in the Margins by Warren Carter, just one of the resources that I use, just like a verse by verse kind of I don't know if you can even see that. But here's what Warren Carter has to say about verse 31. Peter trusted the waves and the wind more to sink him then he trusted Jesus' word to empower him to walk on the water. His little faith meant that he was distracted and overwhelmed. Peter will not have learned this lesson by the time of Jesus' death, when he again focuses on the opposing forces rather than on Jesus' power. Faith. Then he goes on to cite several passages that demonstrate that faith is reliance on Jesus' word despite opposition. Wow. Reliance on Jesus' word despite opposition. I mean, I totally resonate with this trusting the opposition, the opposing forces, the dangers, more than Jesus and his word, his calling out onto the water. I mean, everything we know about Jesus is that if Jesus says come, it means that Jesus is going to support Peter out there on the water. He's not calling Peter out there to drown. Just as God did not call Israel out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, to be killed by Pharaoh at the sea, to drown in that sea, right? It's kind of it's going back again to those old stories, and just as God saved us then, God's going to save us now. This salvation is a process. This liberation is a journey, and it's full of dangers. But God's got us. Jesus is going to empower us to walk that way. But I get that. I get that fear, that focusing on the things that frighten me, the things that threaten me, rather than the invitation and all of the promises that come with that. Boy, what would be possible in our lives? I mean, here it is. It's a glimpse of what would be possible in our lives, not just our individual lives, because I think there's something here about the community of disciples and the community that Jesus has built with them and them with each other. What would be possible for us as we began to trust Jesus' word and just simply trust Jesus, have faith in Jesus over the dangers around us, over the opposing forces, over the threats. If we really did take heart and did not be afraid, we'd be walking on the water too. That's the plain message of this story. Walking on the water in this freedom highway journey to a promised land, to the great feast at the end that this one in the wilderness prefigures, that is so abundant and full of justice and love. Boy, so hold on to that if you can today, this week. Don't be afraid. Take heart. The God of liberation is on our side, is near. Well, thanks for spending some time with me. I'll talk to you later.